Hello. I most enjoy doing these 10-day trends when there's a real definitive story to tell. Now in this instance the outlook's a little messy, however I will try to give a bit more details as to what we can expect as we go through the next 10 days or so. Starting off at the moment though and looking at our friend the jet stream, that fast moving ribbon of air higher up in the atmosphere, that does influence what goes on at the surface. And the jet stream has moved to run across the UK through this week, and that's why you've no doubt been aware it's turned pretty cloudy and pretty wet for many of us as well. As well as that, the position of the jet stream has led to some very mild air, some warm air pushing in across the UK, which is why it has been exceptionally mild recently. On Wednesday, Valentine's Day, temperatures reached highs around 16, 17 Celsius, so close to, not quite, but close to being the warmest Valentine's Day on record for the UK. As well as that, the position of the jet stream is going to allow for some unsettled weather to feed up from the southwest. The system will push in as we go through Thursday, so a wet start, particularly across parts of Scotland on Thursday morning, some persistent rain here, and then more rain to come as we go through the day, particularly across northern, but also western parts, some heavy outbreaks of rain quite likely. In the southeast though on Thursday, it actually should stay mostly dry, and there will be some bright spells around, though not much sunshine, just a bit of brightness breaking through the cloud at times. Look at those temperatures though, could be even milder on Thursday compared to Wednesday, highs around 17 Celsius quite likely. But aside from the warmth, it's the rain that's a bigger cause for concern. Notice a swathe of very wet weather that's likely to push in across south-southwestern parts as we go through Thursday afternoon and into the evening as well. As a result of this, we do have a couple of warnings in force. Across southwest England, South Wales, we're likely to see 15 to 20 millimetres quite widely, and perhaps 30 to 40 millimetres over the higher ground. Also likely to have some heavy rain affecting parts of the Midlands as well as we go through Thursday and overnight into Friday. As a result, the usual impacts from the heavy rain are possible: disruption to travel, some spray on the roads, and also some localised flooding too. If we look at the rainfall totals in a bit more detail for Thursday then, and these charts compare the model outputs from the Met Office on the left, the ECMWF European Centre for Medium Range Forecasting in the middle, and GFS, the American model, on the right. And I wanted to show you these because there's relatively good agreement in where we're most likely to see the heaviest rain. Like I say, for Thursday starting off pretty wet across much of Scotland, some persistent rain, and all the models showing that. And then likely to have some heavy rain across western but particularly southwestern parts of the UK. This is shown by both the Met Office and ECMWF models. GFS has the heaviest rain a little bit further west and doesn't have quite the highest rainfall totals, but nonetheless it's not too dissimilar to what we can expect or what these two models are suggesting. All of them in relatively good agreement though that in the southeast it should stay largely dry. As we look further ahead then, and the weather system that brings the heavy rain on Thursday clears away towards the east for Friday, and then we have a brief ridge of high pressure building. It's a relatively weak one though, so whilst it will be a much quieter day, there will still be some outbreaks of rain around. And then while Saturday gets off to a dry start for many, we see this weather system pushing its way in from the west, and that is likely to bring some heavy rain as we go through later Saturday, and just about clinging on to some of that heavy rain in the southeast as we start Sunday morning as well. Again, looking at the rainfall totals we can expect on Saturday, and once more looking at the 24-hour rainfall totals through the whole of the day, and once more comparing those same three models, and there's a little bit less agreement this time. Unsurprising, we're looking further ahead, but they are all suggesting that the wettest weather is most likely towards the west, as you would expect with a system pushing in from the Atlantic. But some heavy rainfall totals likely across western parts of the UK, just some differences as to exactly where we're most likely to see the heaviest rain. It perhaps doesn't look like it will be quite as heavy as the rain that we're expecting on Thursday, but coming so quickly after all the wet weather we've had this week, there could still be some localised impacts. And worth bearing in mind, there will be some rain pushing across eastern parts, and like I showed you before, in the southeast we could still be clinging on to that rain as we go into Sunday morning, which wouldn't be captured by these 24-hour rainfall totals which are just looking at Saturday. Otherwise, and as we go through Sunday then, so that rain clears away towards the east, and then we are under the influence more of higher pressure towards the south of the UK, and it's trying to dominate our weather as we go through the latter part of the weekend and into the beginning of next week. There are low pressure systems though not too far away, so there will be still a brisk flow and there will be some showery rain around, but it's trying to settle the weather down, but it doesn't last particularly long. To understand what's likely to happen happen thereafter, let's look across the Atlantic and again at the jet stream, a very active jet stream developing in the Atlantic as we go through the start of next week. And that is going to likely lead to this high pressure, which is trying to dominate the weather across the UK, being pushed away towards the southeast. And in doing so, that will allow for weather systems to come in from the Atlantic, bringing some more unsettled weather to the UK as we go through next week. Looking at that in a bit more detail, and this is one possible regime from ECMWF, the most likely regime for Wednesday the 21st of February, and this suggests that we're likely to have a relatively deep area of low pressure somewhere towards the northwest of the UK. That will bring a westerly flow, some brisk or strong winds and some heavy rain, especially to western parts, but many places likely to have a pretty wet day as we go through the middle of next week. I say this is the most likely regime. There is some uncertainty. Worth bearing in mind, there's around a 50% chance of something like this going by ECMWF data coming off. And the second most likely regime is fairly similar in as much as it still has a low pressure, but just in a slightly different place towards the northwest of the UK, but nonetheless suggesting that it is going to be an unsettled spell. The uncertainty comes though as to exactly where we're going to see the heaviest rainfall, and due to the position of the jet stream, if that actually goes a little bit further south, then we may drag in some colder air, at least across northern parts of the UK, so that could bring something wintry, but I think it's most likely that we stick with the largely mild theme, and we do see some more unsettled weather coming through as we go through the middle of next week with some heavy rain and perhaps some strong winds too. Now let's look at the multi-model probabilistic pressure trend. If you're a regular viewer of these 10-day trends or deep dives, then you'll have no doubt seen this before, but what it's trying to show is the most likely pressure trend. So blues are showing where low pressure is more likely and reds where higher pressure is more likely. And we start off with today's date, Wednesday the 14th of February on the left-hand side, and then we go further into the future as we go towards the right. And then down the column on the left, this is showing the different model runs, the most recent model run at the top, and then model runs from further ago as we go downwards. And what you can see is there's been relatively good agreement, unsurprisingly, that low pressure will be dominating the picture as we go through Wednesday into Thursday. It's wet at the moment, so that's why it's suggesting that. However, as we go through into the weekend, and for Saturday it's suggesting higher pressure, and you may be thinking, but you just showed me that it's going to be pretty wet on Saturday, and whilst that is the case, there is still that high pressure towards the south trying to push its way in on Saturday, and so that's why it's coloured up red here. And then higher pressure still being the dominant feature as we go through Sunday into the start of next week, but then the colours change as we go through next week. So lower pressure is more likely, like I showed you, the jet stream pushing away the high pressure and that allowing for those lower pressure systems to develop. And so that is likely to bring some pretty unsettled weather at times as we go through next week. But what about temperatures? And I already showed you that we have some very mild air across the UK at the moment, and we are going to see temperatures dipping, but not a huge amount. Here are meteorograms for the capital cities, again from ECMWF data, showing both your maximum and your minimum forecasts through the next 10 days, 2 weeks, I believe. However, you may not be able to see all of these at once, so let's focus at London, or on London, and you can see temperatures at the moment. Let's look at our maximum temperatures. And what this chart shows, in case you've not seen it before, shows the forecast temperatures compared to the climatological average. And so the average is in this shaded area, and the box and whisker plots show the forecasts, and they show the uncertainty. So at the moment, much higher than average, and that's why temperatures are several degrees above average. Like I said, highs around 16, 17 Celsius, and they do dip down as we go through the weekend, but staying above average. And then as we go through next week, yes, they lower a little bit, but only to around average for the time of year. There is a bit of spread, as you would expect, as we look more than a week ahead. There is some uncertainty, but generally it looks like temperatures are most likely to be around average. So no real signs of a major change to anything much colder as we go through next week at least. But what about further ahead? And well, you may have heard of something called sudden stratospheric warming, and that's when we have warming up in the stratosphere, so higher up in the atmosphere, and that can actually have an impact on what happens at the surface. It can disrupt the circulation in the air around the surface, and that can lead to blocking patterns and sometimes some pretty cold weather affecting the UK. Now, it's worth bearing in mind at this time of year the stratosphere should be warming anyway, but there are strong signs that it's going to be warming a little bit quicker than usual as we go through the next few days, the next week or so. So we are likely to be having a sudden stratospheric warming event. What that then means is a blocking pattern becomes more likely. It's not guaranteed, but we could end up with a blocking pattern more likely than if this warming hadn't been happening more quickly than normal. The position of this blocking pattern is really important. If it's to the north of the UK or to the northeast, then it can drag in some northerly, easterly air, which at this time of year can be pretty cold and lead to some severe cold weather. But different positions of that blocking area of high pressure could actually lead to just some more unsettled, milder weather. So there's still quite a bit of uncertainty as to exactly what this means for the UK, whether or not we get a blocking pattern. That the jury's still out, and where that blocking pattern forms will then have a huge impact on the kind of weather we can expect in the UK. So we still need to firm up on the details as to how it's exactly going to affect us. We will obviously keep you up to date nearer the time, and if you are more interested in the weekend's weather than I had time to go through today, then do check out our weekend weather video, which will be available with me on YouTube tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.